with regard to restrict growth of IRS. Could Dan Starr raise his hand?
Congressman, we could spend all evening debating major issues. My question relates to a very tiny potential savings. Is there any way that Congress can impose restrictions on the growth of IRS? Because we hear a year or two ago when Obamacare went in that IRS was going to be hiring 120,000 new examiners just to enforce Obamacare. Is there anything Congress can do on almost a micro level, agency by agency, to say, stop the growth?
Well, there's a couple of things. In the health care bill that was passed, there were a certain number of employees added to IRS. I'm not sure if the number was, as you said, 120,000, but I can check into it and look. I thought it was less than that. But that being said, the question is about essentially how do you sort of control costs or the size and scope of this agency or any other agency. There's a couple things that have been done, and there's a few things that can continue to be done. First, I'm a big fan of auditing any agency. I mean, anytime your taxpayer dollars go to fund something, we ought to make sure that those dollars are being spent effectively and efficiently and for the program in which it's intended. And we want to maximize that every dollar that is spent on a program and make sure it goes to its intended use. So auditing different programs and agencies makes a lot of sense. And we haven't done a lot of that. GAO just released in the last 6 weeks or so a report on I think it was 3 or 4 agencies. They're going to continue those audits for each and every agency, in which they report back to Congress the cost savings or the duplicative programs that have been cited by myself, that have been cited by the President. And again, there's agreement there, there's bipartisan agreement that those things ought to be limited. That's only part of the savings program or savings plan. When we have a $1.6 trillion deficit, which is where we are today, a $14 trillion debt, savings, efficiencies is part of it. But we have to have a national conversation about where the remainder of those savings are going to come from. And I've heard from lots of people that they want everything on the table for the deal. I've heard from people that they'd like to see the country get back into balance. And I suspect most people here, while we have varying views on different programs, that we probably do want to see the country in balance. So that's got to be the goal. It has to be through good government, effectiveness, efficiency. So we're going to continue those audits. Let me give you an example. It's been identified that we've got about $38 billion in wrong payments in the entitlement system, improper payments. And we're only right now recouping about $2 billion of those improper payments. Imagine if you had 100%, if you could reduce that number significantly and put that money back into the program itself to preserve it. Those are the things that I think are important, whether you're 73, 63, 53, or 3 years old, to make sure that those dollars we're spending are spent for its original intention, and to make sure that we're doing it effectively and efficiently. So we will continue to complete those audits. Bills will then come forward in the House to remove those either redundant, duplicative programs. And I think you will see bipartisan support for that in the House. And the President has asked that the House and Senate focus on this. And you'll see areas where the House and Senate and the President agree and continue reducing the trajectory of spending and get it back closer to balance.
Next question is from Bill Coughlin from Exeter on taxes and oil. Bill, could you raise your hand?
My question regarding 2 separate questions, so I guess I'll end up asking one. If we could save somewhere between 15 and 20% on the cost of a gallon of gas, would you be in favor of that?
I'm in favor of any reduction in gas prices.
Okay, then
if you have that kind of reduction.
I have a suggestion.
Okay, great. Let me get my pen.
In 2000, the wisdom of Congress passed a law called the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, thereby allowing all of the Wall Street speculators to get into the futures market. Heretofore, it was an end-user market. If you were in the oil business, you could hedge your position. If you were a farmer, you could hedge your position. Instead, good old Phil Graham, because his wife was a director of Enron, and we all know what happened to that, got Congress to pass this wonderful act allowing the Wall Street speculators into the futures market. And by doing so, even oil company executives have admitted that probably 20% of the cost of a barrel of oil in today's world is due to speculation. So why don't you repeal it?
I think this goes along with the theme of how taxpayer dollars are being spent or how they're being mismanaged or misused. I agree to take a look at that, and I agree that it's not just that is driving the price of oil right now and gasoline prices. So let's look at that. Let's see if we can be more responsible relative to Wall Street. But let's also look at the other components. You talked about 17 to 20%. There are other things that we can be doing as well. So I would absolutely look at that. I'll take a look at the piece of legislation, and if you want to provide your specific contact information, when I get back to DC next week, I'll tell you if there's any bills that might address that particular issue. It's either in the House or the Senate, and I'll give you a legislative status on where it is, and I'll keep you posted. It also brings up a further, I'm sorry? What will never happen?
Don't just look at
Well,
it.
let's be optimistic. Maybe it can. I'm a look at the glass half full kind of guy. When I first got to Washington, people said there was no chance that the Senate was going to agree to the House on anything. And lo and behold, when we start working together, and we look at each other again, not through ideology, but as colleagues, we start to get things done. I think that's important in this nation. So if that's something that you want me to look at as a constituent, I'd be happy to do it.
Next question is from Dan Conley from Portsmouth with regard to the tax cuts and unemployment.
Right behind you.
Congressman, I've heard an awful lot about the benefits of continuing the Bush tax cuts. That tax cuts will increase prosperity, will increase the likelihood that businesses will have the money to invest in people. I consider myself sort of an expert on this. I have been underemployed since January 26, 2009. In spite of diligent efforts to find work, I'm making $10 an hour part-time as a dishwasher. That's way less than a quarter of what I made. How are the tax cuts going to help me get a job that's going to enable me to pay the rent? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question. I think you touched on two very important things, unemployment and, more importantly, underemployment. We look at the unemployment numbers here in New Hampshire, and most would suggest that our unemployment numbers are low, and that we're doing better than most of the country. But I hear stories like this one, where someone is underemployed, and their entire lifestyle changes as a result of it, and their obligations are affected as a result of it. And that's not right for any one of us. We live in a country where I believe we should be always having the opportunity to improve ourselves, to be responsible for our family. In terms of where we are economically at the national level, I think we've got to focus on getting back to balance. Congress serious about reducing some spending in some of the areas that we've talked about. Well, let me tell you what I'm doing in New Hampshire to talk specifically about jobs and to try to improve the job market. I sent out a survey about 2 or 3 weeks ago to I'll be happy to answer the question. I mean, there was an agreement that was made in December by the President in the last Congress to extend certain tax cuts, and that's now extended for a couple of years. That's why it happened back in December. So now this Congress is in place, and we're grappling with the notion of how do we get our spending under control. The Gang 6 in the Senate is looking to come forward with a particular proposal. We haven't seen it yet. So until we see it, I couldn't comment on it. But there are ideas and solutions that are coming from the Senate. The House ideas have focused more on reducing spending and trying to even out, eliminate some tax loopholes, broaden the base, and make it fair for people. But in terms of direct job opportunities here in New Hampshire, let me tell you what I'm doing so I can have direct impact on anyone who'd like the assistance. I sent out within the last 3 weeks to 1,000 businesses here in New Hampshire in the 1st Congressional District at random, asking them what it is that they wanted the federal government to do or not to do to not only ensure they could keep and retain their existing employees, but grow their business. Because we have people in our state, in our communities, who are being negatively impacted by the ongoing economic conditions that we have. We got several responses. We're going to continue to receive responses through the next month, but today I unveiled the results of those responses. And I have to say, and maybe some people here won't agree, but here's the responses I got. The majority of people wanted to see a reduction in their taxes, and they wanted to see a reduction in regulatory requirements. They also wanted predictability. They also wanted predictability from the federal government on policy, so they could have an idea of what they were going to do with their business. They could get an idea of how they would grow the business. So, in the last few days, I visited businesses in Seacoast, in the North Country, in Londonderry, Derry, Manchester. And I'm going to now, in June, hold 2 job forums, two job fairs. One here in the Seacoast, one up in the North Country, to try to match employers and individuals who either want to improve their position or if they're unemployed, try to get a position. I think that's important that I do my very best as your representative to bring you and bring those employers together that are willing to hire. During the job tour that I took in the last few days, I have met businesses in varying industries who are hiring. They're hiring at smaller rates than I'd like to see, but they're out there. Now, it's extremely competitive, which is why you've been underemployed for far too long. The second thing I'm going to do is host a manufacturers summit. I think part of getting out of this economy is having a strong manufacturing industry. We have some competitive issues here in New England, particularly with electricity rates, as I continue to hear from manufacturers about a bit of a challenge for them. But nonetheless, they want to stay here because it's a great state, and the quality of life is phenomenal. The third and final thing we're going to do in the fall is have an innovators conference. So if anybody in this room has an idea that they want to try to bring to market, but A, you may not have the resources to do it, you're not sure how to start, whether it's through a patent or trademark, or you need some capital, whether it's from a bank or whether it's from an angel investor or venture capitalism, we can try to marry those 2 entities together. There are things that I can do on a policy level to try to steer the environment in which business can prosper, but there are also things that I can do here as your representative, and I'm going to take every opportunity to try to do that and give you the best opportunity to get back to the employment that you seek. And I'd be happy to go with you personally to these job fairs, whether it's out here or up north, and make sure that I do everything I can to put you in a better position.